Do you want me to tell you what I thought about the movie?
Sure. It is not the worst movie you watched.
It's not the worst, not the best. I'm sure that I will come back to this again. Be like, what happens in this movie again? And then be instantly reminded, like, oh, that's right. This is why I don't watch this one.
The man.
Welcome to Kyle and Dave versus the machine. I need a script. This week, we're talking about the Bond film Diamonds Are Forever. We watched it. We've reviewed it in depth, with a special guest,
Mr. Kyle Turner, yes.
So I had to do it 2 Kyles.
A film reviewer himself, a great person to follow on Twitter. That's what I always maybe say about our guests, but a great Twitter follow.
Bond nut.
What I actually really love about Kyle is that even if I might disagree with his ultimate point, I like reading his writing, see what his point of view is. So yeah, he's definitely a great guest to have on the show for this. This is the hard thing about this movie in particular. It's this weird thing within the Bond franchise that's never happened since. Someone came in to be Bond, they were fired, and then another Bond, a previous Bond, came back again in Sean Connery. They basically just backed up the truck and dumped a bunch of money onto Sean Connery's lawn, and he was like, oh, okay, I guess I'll do this. It does feel a little dated. There are some things that I do like. I do think that Sean Connery's natural charisma is able to take the character so far, but for the majority of this movie, I always think, why is this something they're sending Bond to do? They're sending him out to do investigation on like this diamond smuggling. It's like, that doesn't seem like an actual Bond case. We want higher stakes in our Bond films, and it takes a long time for those stakes to actually come into play. There's also some questionable characters, I will say, and I find that the action scenes really end abruptly. It's basically they go and then they're like, we're bored with this, and they just stop. It's really odd pacing, I think, through the most of it. I don't know. There's some fun things I can get out of this movie, but it's definitely not one of the ones I'm coming back and rewatching. Good song. I like the song a lot.
Song's great. We've been getting that comment too on our YouTube channel.
Right.
Just... I agree with you, surprisingly. I mean, we weren't on YouTube yet, but last year we watched, not GoldenEye, Tomorrow Never Dies. Tomorrow Never Dies. It made me really upset. This one I was like tepid, upset. And like to Kyle's point, if you are planning to watch it, it takes about 45 minutes for you to just figure out if this is even a Bond film. I mean, They keep calling him James Bond, but it's kind of weird. The opening sequence is fun, and then 45 minutes of fucking dragging your face through the slop. And then finally when the Doomsday device and some of the story arc is revealed, then you're like, oh, maybe. And then it gives you a letdown for like 30 more minutes.
Right.
And then the final like 10 minutes, you're like, oh yeah, this is a Bond film.
Yeah, it's a Bond film. That's the thing. It's like, this is one of those movies you could watch as YouTube clips. Just show me like the 10 minutes of this movie that's good, and then we can go on to the next one.
Shout out to our fellow podcaster, Alex Williams, who listens to every podcast at 2 times speed. Right. That's what this movie
really needs.
You need to do that.
Maybe like a 4 times speed. There's a few elements, though, I think that the context around this movie does need to be set up where this is very much a continuation, especially the last movie before it, where Bond's wife is killed off, and that's kind of what he's going on for a revenge mission. But not really. Like, again, that's like the first 10 minutes, and that's kind of dropped. In different hands and in a different era, this would have had that much more like emotional stakes into it. I am going to avenge the death of my wife, which they kind of redo. They redo in the Daniel Craig series.
Yeah, I was going to say,
better
we get a little Quantum Solace action, but that's something we talk about too, how I didn't realize the reboot that they did with Daniel Craig is really a reboot. There are so many, not just character arcs and plot devices, but even some of the choreography and the use of action is hinted at in this film. So there are a couple action sequences where you're like, oh, this is actually pretty raw.
Yeah.
And then as Kyle brought up, we're just like, nah, we're good.
You can't beat him.
Let's move on to space buggies.
Right.
There are some questionable things. I mean, we can ask the general question, Kyle, is there such thing as bad representation?
Yes, I believe there is.
Fortunately, our cellar is rather poorly stocked with clay.
I mean, you can go and ask Dr. No that same question.
You mean casting Yellowface beside actual Asian actors is a no-no?
In this one, I think you're referring to the 2 obviously gay characters that are not really well done and not really fleshed out, and you don't really know why they're there in the first place. Again, I think in better hands or in a better developed story treatment, because I believe those characters, as we found out in our episode, were in the original book. So I feel that maybe there was a way to make them feel more ingrained in the plot, and they just really aren't. They're really the side characters who kind of show up randomly. I think this obviously is influencing the Austin Powers franchise, of course. I mean, all of Bond is. But specifically, there's a point point where Blofeld duplicates himself.
Good evening, Mr. Bond. Good evening, 007. Double jeopardy, Mr. Bond.
This is like the whole impetus of what Mini-Me turns out to be.
Cindy the Clown!
He is exactly like you in every way, except 1/8 your size.
There's a direct through line from this movie to something that is being parodied in the Austin Powers franchise.
We did watch one.
We did, yeah.
It didn't hold up. Looking back at this film, maybe because Daniel Craig has greedied up Bond so much that the cartoonishness of the trapeze artist explosions, that's largely disappeared in action films now. It's campy at this point.
Yeah.
It's turned into a meme. Whereas at that time, that probably would have been exciting. So I should judge it less harshly, but I won't, because that's not who I am. Yeah, so overall, I don't know, Kyle, I am very below lukewarm on this movie. It is not the worst movie we watched, but it will not hold any part of my brain.
It's not, that's why I said in the episode, it's so middle of the road for me. It's not the worst, not the best, not just in the Bond franchise, but just for movies we've watched this year. I'm sure that I will come back to this again in like another 8 years and be like, what happens in this movie again? And then be instantly reminded like, oh, that's right. This is why I don't watch this one.
If you ever wondered if you can see yourself being cremated, the answer in this film is yes. They have great lighting inside caskets, so don't worry. After you die, you'll see the whole thing. It'd be awesome.
Casket tips from David Young.
All right, well, anything else to talk about with this movie?
I don't think there is.
All right, well, we're going to press stop here. It's kind of like a Bond action sequence. We're just going to stop.
Bam.
You can't beat him.